Today, we'll be looking on behaviorism, understanding how behaviors shape learning. Now, let's first start off by looking at some of the basic characteristics and concepts associated with behaviorism. Now, behaviorism is a learning theory that focuses on observable behavior rather than internal mental processes. Now, with behaviorism, learning occurs when there is a measurable change in behavior as a result of experience or conditioning. The theory suggests that all behaviors are acquired through interaction with the environment, and behaviorists believe that learning is universal and the same principle applies to all organisms, including us as humans. Now, some of the basic characteristics and concepts also associated with behaviorism are classical conditioning, which was proposed by Pavlov. And with classical conditioning, it states that you learn by linking two things together. Now, something that doesn't naturally cause a reaction is paired with something that naturally causes a reaction. Over time, you react to the first thing the same way you react to the second thing. So, for example, when Pavlov rang a bell every time he fed his dog, eventually the dog started salivating just as the bell, even without food. Now, another concept is operant conditioning, which is suggested by Skinner. And in operant conditioning, it states that learning occurs through consequences, which means that behaviors followed by rewards are strengthened while those followed by punishment are weakened. An example of this would be where a student studies harder after receiving praise for good grades. And another concept is reinforcement. Now, with reinforcement, we have positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. With positive reinforcement, that is where you add a pleasant stimulus such as praise or reward after a task is completed. But with negative reinforcement, this is now where we remove an unpleasant stimulus. So, for example, no homework for class if participates well within that class. And finally, we have punishment as well, and that is where we introduce or remove a stimulus to reduce unwanted behavior. So, for example, a student usually receives detention if they do not complete their homework. Now, some of the educational applications of behaviorism includes learning involves practice, feedback, and also repetition until the desired behavior is achieved. And here, teachers use reinforcement to encourage participation, homework completion, and also rule following. So examples of these, we have token economies where students earn points for good behavior. And there's also drill and practice software for math courses or language learning courses. And we also have reward charts to promote classroom discipline. And with this, it emphasizes that the teacher's role as the controller of the stimuli and consequences. Now, this video was an example of behaviorism in play.
This is the footage of a controversial 1920s experiment on a baby known as Little Albert, conducted by psychologist John B. Watson. The purpose of the experiment was to show that a normal 9-month-old infant could be conditioned to have a phobia of something he wasn't scared of before. Firstly, Watson presented Little Albert with objects that the baby wasn't afraid of, objects that Albert initially liked. A monkey, a dog, a rabbit, and finally a white rat. Albert particularly liked the white rat. In all of these clips, notice Albert's positive reactions. Now in these clips is where the conditioning starts. Each time Albert tried to touch the white rat, a loud iron rod was struck that would upset him. Notice how Albert starts to cry when he tries to touch the rat. Albert was then shown a rabbit, but this time he immediately begins to cry and attempts to crawl away from it. He then has a negative reaction when a dog is brought in. And then little Albert is agitated when a seal fur coat is brought in. And then Watson wears a furry Santa Claus mask, which invokes an extremely negative response.
Alright, so from that video, we saw where the baby was conditioned, or Albert was conditioned, to fear certain furry animals. And that's the same way that our behaviors are shaped when we are exposed to certain stimuli. So in that video, again, first Albert wasn't scared of furry animals, but after hearing that loud bang that upset him, then he became more afraid of those animals. Alright, we also have that video that explains the same thing as well, and I'll share that in the PowerPoint. Now, let's look at some of the assumptions that behaviorism has about learners. Now, behaviorists views learners as passive recipients who respond to environmental stimuli, and behavior is conditioned through reinforcement or punishment. And learning does not depend on internal thought, but on external experiences. Now, learning is evident only when a change in behavior occurs and internal processes like thinking or emotion are not directly measured. In addition, teachers focus on observable actions like test scores, participation, and accuracy. Now, some examples of learning behavior includes where a teacher praises a student who submits homework early. The positive reinforcement increases the likelihood that the teacher or the student will continue to submit on time. And over time, the behavior becomes an habit, which demonstrates the conditional processing. So we have all been exposed to this in some way or another while going through our educational journey. Now let's look at some of the instructional principles implied by behaviorism. The first is that we must define clear, measurable objectives for every lesson that we produce. Second, we must structure content sequentially from simple tasks to complex tasks. Third, we must provide immediate feedback after learner responses. Fourth, we must use repetition and reinforcement to strengthen learning. And 5, we must encourage mastery through step-by-step progression. Now, what is the teacher role in behaviorism? Now, teachers serve as facilitators of stimuli and controllers of the reinforcement. They create learning environments that elicit desired responses, and learning activities are designed to shape behavior, gradually using reinforcement schedules. So, for example, daily or intermittent rewards. Now, let's look at some of the classroom strategies and tools which we can use to enforce behaviorism. The first is to use reward systems such as stickers and badges or verbal praises, and this will help to motivate students to want to learn a lesson. Second, we can incorporate practice tests, drills, and quizzes to reinforce recall. Third, we can apply behavior contracts for managing classroom behavior. And fourth, we can provide positive feedback consistently to sustain motivation. And all of this are there to actually encourage our students to participate more and to complete a lesson within our classroom. Now, what do other theories, or all the other theories, view behaviorism? Now, the cognitive theory perspective argues that behaviorism overlooks internal mental processes such as thinking, memory, and problem solving. and they view learners as active participants who process information, not just respond to certain stimuli. And an example of this is cognitive theory explains learning as understanding concepts, not just memorizing concepts. Now, the constructivist perspective on behaviorism, they critique behaviorism for ignoring how learners build meaning through experience, and they emphasize active engagement, collaboration, and reflection over just rote learning. Now, learning, according to constructivists, is contextual and personalized, not just conditioned behavior. Now, how does behaviorism compare with other theories? So behaviorism versus cognitivism. The focus is on observable behavior when it comes on to behaviorism, whereas with cognitivism, they focus more on mental processes. As it relates to the learning processes, with behaviorism, it is more on conditioning and reinforcement, whereas with cognitivism, it is more on information processing and organization. The role of the teacher in behaviorism is the controller of the stimuli, whereas in cognitivism, the facilitator is more the facilitator of understanding. So behavior, an example would be repetition and rewards, whereas with cognitivism, it is use of concept maps and different schemas. Now let's look on behaviorism versus cognitivism. With behaviorism, the nature of learning is reactive, whereas with cognitivism, or with constructivism rather, it is more an active and self-directed. The learner role in behaviorism is more passive, whereas in cognitivism, or constructivism rather, it is an active knowledge construction. The teaching approach when it comes down to behaviorism is more of drill and practice, whereas with constructivism, it is on exploration and discovery. With behaviorism, an example of that would be the use of flashcards and drills, whereas with constructivism, it is on project-based learning. Now, we may be wondering, why use behaviorism? Now, it provides a structured framework for teaching and behavior management. It is ideal for teaching foundational skills and habit formation, and it works well for tasks that requires accuracy, consistency, and repetition, such as spelling or math. Now, some real applications of behaviorism includes classroom management, where we reinforce system, or the reinforcement system promotes discipline and engagement. And also we can see it being used in corporate training, and that is used for repetitive skill training and compliance programs. And in the therapeutic setting, it can be applied to applied behavior analysis, or ABA, which is used in behavior modification. So some examples in practice includes a reward-based reading program that encourages daily reading. So in most books, if you have any online books, you might notice that you have certain rewards if you keep up your daily streak, right? We also have behaviorism being shown in gamified e-learning platforms where they use badges and also progress tracking. And we also have behavior contracts between teacher and student outlining the expected conduct. When assessing activities when it comes down to behaviorism, we must focus on observable performance rather than internal understanding, and frequent testing, quizzes, and feedback, which measures learning progress. And learning mastery is also achieved when the learner demonstrates correct behavior consistently. So some examples of assessment tools that can be used are quizzes and multiple choice tests that checks recall, performance checklists to record skill mastery, observation log tracking, participation and completion, automated feedback systems in e-learning modules. And I also have another video to share on behaviorism as well. For the activity that we'll be focusing on, we'll be looking on a training activity where we are required to create a smoothie, right? Or to make a smoothie. And we'll be working with this in pairs. So it will be in the form of a treasure hunt activity where participants from different groups will come up and make a smoothie, right? So teams will first of all search a room for the different items. So for example, a bowl. And once you find that bowl, the team or your team members will share. And that will kind of help to encourage you on to make that smoothie or to tell you that you're on the right path. You will then need to locate frozen fruits and different items to make your smoothie. Now, you won't know what type of smoothie you will be making, right? So your team will decide on what type of smoothie, and then you will have the chance to make that smoothie for them. You will also need to find different liquids as well, and you are required to make that smoothie at a particular texture, right? So in the end, you will combine all of those and pass that out to your different team members, and we'll see who can complete this task first. Right, so after you would have made your smoothie, your team members will need to taste and adjust that. So we'll have one team member coming up again, and they will try to encourage you as they make up that smoothie as to what you need to add and what else you need to add to make that a perfect smoothie. All right, thank you and good luck.